Okay, so we've already talked about this a lot, but I just put an extra slide in here on performance testing. One of the most important items to test on your app. Battery, the most important, right? User perception. You're killing my battery, you're off. I don't want you on my device anymore. Be aware of battery as the most important performance testing item to look at. Followed by CPU, memory, and I forgot network utilization on this tab, which I mentioned earlier. I would put him as number 4, right? Possibly increasing. Always performance test on real devices. Performance testing on an emulator is not going to yield usable results, in my opinion. You might be able to do some performance testing on like the device anywhere, but the problem is when you're doing performance testing, you really want a good responsive device where you can quickly get numbers and look at things and all. If you're having to navigate and click through the screen slowly to get to the memory usage tab on a virtual device, that could be rough, right?
Normally the battery utilization, I mean, I'm just, maybe I'm not knowing that. Apart from the CPU utilization, what contributes to the battery?
Network utilization, highly.
Wi-Fi?
Wi-Fi, yes.
No, but eventually your CPU is, I'm just talking of any of the hardware without utilizing any of the hardware.
So you're correct in that everything eventually comes back to using the CPU in some degree, but the more network calls you make, right? So someone could look at the CPU and say that, hey, overall my application over an average only used 1% of the CPU. So that can't be the problem, right? But how often are you querying network, doing network traffic? Network usage, radio usage, Wi-Fi, cellular, GPS. Huge battery guy, right? Your application might turn on the GPS, right? And then you're done. You take your thing for 2 seconds and you're done. But guess what? You forgot to turn the GPS off when you were done. So now the GPS runs in the background and kills your battery in 4 hours, right? So again, that's not going to show up in the CPU utilization of your application. Your application is going to look like flying colors. Ain't me, sir. Right? And then when your guys say, I noticed my GPS icon didn't go away from my tool tray after we did that where am I located action, right? So GPS, huge battery drain. Network utilization, radio utilization. Screen, yes. Now screen you can't really control, right? I mean, you know, the more the user has it up, the more it uses. If you're doing an application that uses the screen a lot, like a game or a newsreader or something, well, yeah, you need the screen on, right? And if you're doing a game with animation and all, yeah, battery utilization shouldn't be a concern for a game developer, right? I mean, for the most part.
The thing is, like for example, in screens, you can do something called screen lock.
Mm-hmm.
Once you grab a screen lock, the screen will never turn off.
Yes.
And so if your application is the one which is grabbing a screen lock and forget to remove
You
it,
forget to remove it, yes.
the screen will never go away.
Yes.
So you'll continue to.
Yep. The good news about that is it's usually pretty obvious that you'll see at some point. Why the heck is my phone turning off during a game?
Somebody puts
Yeah.
it in your pocket,
Yeah.
and you expect it to go
Yep.
off screen after a while. It doesn't go off screen. It's going
Very
to
good. Yep. Screen lock. Yeah. So that also something you can look at. So the screen is definitely the biggest battery user from a user perspective. So.
How about services and data collection?
Again, data collection, sometimes they can, yes, depending on how often you do it. Again, if your application is constantly querying the OS for a bunch of data, be careful how often you do stuff about that, right? That I would attribute to standard CPU utilization at that part. Is that when you're gathering that data, the CPU is conserving, so that's taking the battery, so absolutely. The top things, if I had to rack the top things that use the battery, I would say GPS number 1. I think you probably agree with me. GPS number 1. Screen, yes, screen, maybe even above GPS, depending on how if it's on or not. Then network traffic over the various radios. Then you get into some of the other things like CPU utilization of your application, things like that, right?
And even on the network, it's again, Wi-Fi is actually more costlier than
Yes.
3G, and 3G is
Yeah.
Well, the Wi-Fi is faster, so you can actually.
Right,
net
it can do more.
consumption Is,
Yep.
slower, so.
And
Yeah.
for games, GPU will take more battery.
Yes, absolutely, for games, yeah. Again, when I think of games, right, if I'm running a game and it causes, I'm sure to some degree there's concern there, but if you're designing a high-tech game that really uses the GPU and all, I would hope most users expect that their battery is going to drain faster, right? How much can you correct that? Okay, we can make the game less graphic intensive. Well, it may not be as fun, right? So, again, speaking of games, I think you get into a whole different realm when it comes to battery and utilization and all. I'm talking more for like standard business applications, background applications, things like that. But absolutely, GPU would be a factor as well if you were dealing with games. Okay, you can search the marketplace for helpful tools, right? There are tons of battery monitors and devices on the marketplace. The funny thing is you'll get different ones and they all kind of do things a little differently, so you never quite know who to believe. I have my personal favorites. I use one called Battery Mix. Works pretty well. I'm not a fan of the built-in Android battery thing. It doesn't even show my application because it's a background app most of the time, so my application doesn't even appear in the list ever on the Google one, but it does appear in third-party ones. Be aware, try out some different applications, see what's out there. So we've had people write custom Python scripts to run on Android devices to get like CPU utilization. There's another one whose name escapes me. Let me see if I still have it on my device that I use for standard basic performance testing. I'm seeing if I have it on here anymore. It is called, I think it's System Panel. If I remember right, it's called System Panel. There's a free version, and then there is a paid version, which is very cheap, talking a couple dollars, that can do more heuristics and tracking. I believe it's called System Panel, which I happen to like. It can show CPU and memory utilization, and if you buy the paid version, you can actually turn on the charting, and it'll monitor over a period of a certain amount of hours how your application's using CPU and memory. It does a decent job. It's one of the ones that I personally used a few times, so for doing testing. So there are ones out there. Again, we're still looking for those cohesive final performance tools that are going to solve our problems and allow us to get these results in a more official, consistent, manner. And they're coming. People are working on them. So, okay. The last thing we have for this presentation, just a quick summary of helpful hints, things to remember. Okay. So when developing in-house enterprise apps, make sure testing starts when development's in progress. I like that one. Sit next to the developer. Hey, what you working on? Is that feature ready? Can I get a build? Test it. Let me go see how it works, right? How's that going to work? How are you coding that? Know your target and platform devices, especially true on Android, that dreadful word fragmentation. Don't assume that because it works on one device, it works on all. There's no easy way to this. You can't test on all devices, right? All you can do is try and test on a few different ones and see what happens. Don't underestimate the importance of performance testing, and always have at least a few physical devices available, right? Especially older ones. Again, this is the point for all devices, right? In the iOS world, they always tell you to make sure you test your app on an iPhone 3GS because the memory and everything available was much less. It's much slower than a 4 and a 4S. Early Android, we always keep like some HTC Ones from the first 2.2 version that was out. Our applications are supported on 2.2 and above, so we always keep older ones available just so we have them to do some testing on. Okay. I think I missed the last one. Hold on one second. There we go. When possible, have a group of beta testers to help with real-world testing. Have people really testing your application. One of the things someone mentioned earlier with Device Anywhere is, how do I test GPS functionality? You can't. The best way to test GPS functionality is still to have people go out and use the app, right? Walking around with it, right? Use it on a regular basis. How's your battery look after you've been walking around with this application for 3 days? Don't underestimate or overestimate the importance of anecdotal test results, right? People know the concept of placebo here in the medical field. They have like double-blind trials where they give half the guys the real drug and they inject the other guys with, nothing, a fake one, so that, they can eliminate the percentage of people who will automatically assume that it caused the problem. Oh, I developed a rash from your drug. All I gave you was water, right? That type of thing. I kind of want to do a test, the same thing with Android. I want to take my application. I want to put my real application on 10 devices, and I want to put a fake application that does absolutely nothing, that has my name on 10 more, and see how many of the people with the fake application come back and say I'm killing their battery, right? Because it's just the law. I call it the law of consumer battery usage. I put your application on last. You're the one killing my battery, especially if it's an application that maybe their company asked them to install or whatever. It's kind of like, take what they're saying, but understand that end users can be overreactive, right, and can make assumptions. The best thing you do is try and gather logs and look at the device, know what's going on, and actually do your due diligence, right, and do the best to prove it's not your app causing the issue. Know the target audience for your application. Are these techie people, or are these people who are more casual users? Make sure the UI and all is designed to impact and reflect that audience's needs. And be aware of the upgrades for both the OS and your app. All right. Any questions on this particular slide before we get into one that's a little more fun? Yes?
One question, specific to Android, Android has a fragmentation issues, right?
Yes.
They have devices that
Yes, I'm going to talk about fragmentation in the next presentation.
So while we are developing the application, which screen size we have to consider mainly?
Good question. So I would say that if you're developing smartphone only, you should probably consider, there are some phones that are very old that have or older or cheaper that have under 2-inch screens. They're kind of a little harder to consider. I would say 3 to 4 inches is the standard on the cell phone, on the mobile device world side. On tablet size, you should definitely consider both 7 and 10 inches. Because 7 and 10 inch Android tabs, 6 months ago 10 inches was it, but now there's 7 and 10s. So if you're designing a tablet app, it has to be 7 and 10 inches. If you're doing mobile applications, 3.5 to 4 inches is the general one, although there's some devices that are getting closer to 5 inches now. Right? We base our detection of whether it's a tablet application or not, to whether to display tablet mode or not, by the width of the screen, by the diagonal, I should say. And we keep having to up that slightly, right? Because newer mobile devices are coming out that are being reported as tablets because the screens are slightly larger, right? So we keep having to make slight little adjustments. Okay, up it to 4.65 inches. That's now considered a smartphone, right? Or you got something like the Samsung Galaxy Note, right? It is a phone, but it's a bigger screen. It's a 5. It's a tablet. It's got a pen in it, And one customer came to us and said, hey, this is being reported as a smartphone. It's a tablet. Okay, you change it to tablet. 2 days later, a customer comes, hey, this is being reported as a tablet. It's a smartphone. Technically, it's a hybrid. Do we add a third category now called hybrid? I don't know. It's that big of a deal. So, I would say tablet size 7-10, smartphone size test in the 3.5 to 4.5 screen, and you should be okay for a majority of users. But there are some devices that would have like 3-inch screens. If you get access to one, check it out. But it's probably a small percentage of users. I'm sure there's stats on there on average. There are stats you can get from Google on what devices are being used and the average screen size and all that stuff.
Also depends on the
Should we
location that you.
separate wheels for phone and tablet, or should we?
No, I recommend doing one when possible, unless you're doing an application like a game or something, which has highly intensive graphics and whatever, because that can balloon the size. You don't want to make someone download a 2 gigabyte application on their, on their tablet, on their smartphone, right? So if it's a smaller app that has some graphics but not a lot of heavy load, I recommend using a single application. It's always better. But if you're designing an application with a lot of graphics and all, and you want to take a higher resolution displays on tablets and all, then yes, you should consider it. I would say size of your application is a big factor there.
Yeah, but the size of APK will increase, right? If you are going.
That's why I said that if it's a game that uses a lot of high intensity graphics, yes. But just to have a single APK that supports tablet and smartphones, yeah, I think it's kind of a personal choice by what your desire is or your need. I personally prefer having single applications that work on both. That's my thing. There can be a point where you realize that putting all the additional high resolution images and all can make your application size too big, and you might choose to do that. It's really, it's a personal choice of when to do that. I don't know if Apple, I know Google doesn't have any recommendations on when to actually.
Apple has